Hello and welcome to the Dyson Leadership Podcast. And this week I've got just another great guest that's here to share just some great information. Garrett Delph is going to be joining me here on the podcast, and just what I've learned about him so far since we've connected, what I see his business doing, and those things, doing some incredible work. And so I'm excited to have him on and have him share a little bit. So Garrett, how about you go ahead and just say hello to our podcast audience today?
Well, thanks, Nick. And I appreciate you having me on the show, by the way. It's
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
great to be here. Really great to be here. Well, yeah, I am the founder and CEO of a business called Clarity Ops, and we're essentially an operating partner to small to medium-sized businesses that are struggling with kind of the classic chaos and disorganization that threatens most businesses on the daily. And so our primary goal is to increase gross profit by reorganizing and restructuring their people process, which ultimately has fantastic impact on their performance, which then accelerates their growth and scale and increases their gross profit so that they win. That's what we do.
Absolutely. And I know you solve problems for people and you turn that into profit for a company, and that makes everybody happy.
It does.
And
Go figure.
yeah, I think that's kind of the key. You know, for me, for my business, it's a little more of a challenge in that regard because I teach things that are soft skills or non-technical skills. And so that's hard to measure in a quantitative form to give numbers of you're going to see X dollar return or you're going to see X percentage growth. You know, it's hard in that instance, but with you and Clarity Ops, you know, being able to come alongside and restructure and focus on organizations solving their problems, I know that's very beneficial. So
Yeah.
one thing for our podcast today is we kind of talked about topic and what we were going to share about, and it's one of the things that you work on and work with, and that is organizations who are growth driven businesses, and they're just settling for the status quo of, you know, high stress for their people, low happiness. There's just kind of settling, living with their situation, and they're not looking to be innovative, improve the setting for their people, or to improve maybe quality of life, work-life balance, something of that nature. So
Yeah.
how about you start us off in this, since, you know, this is your topic, this is your business and what you
Sure.
focus on. What are some things that you see in organizations specifically that kind of makes you passionate or interested in discussing this further?
Yeah. Thank you, by the way. You are right. I'm pretty darn passionate about it, only because I lived in the wake of the negative consequences of settling for status quo for a vast majority of my career as an entrepreneur. And it's only been in the last, probably 7 years that over time we had major breakthrough as a result of, different planning and different execution. So going back to the status quo thing, I think maybe a synonym for that is to settle. And I'm not suggesting that business owners and leaders are lazy, but what I am suggesting is that they have just resolved to decide that this is how it's going to have to be, because it's how it is for everybody. And that is living in internal operational cultural chaos and not being able to find your way and just going, it's too big. And so this is just what business is about. You have to win at all cost. And that means at the cost of the hearts and minds of the people, which typically means high stress, low happiness. Typically means when it comes to your operational business outcomes, they're unpredictable. They vary in quality, in speed, in delivery times. Your paths to innovation are thwarted or never realized because you can't organize your people, process, and performance. And it's this real crazy yo-yo where a business actually pays capital to employees to go live disorganized and full of fret and chaos. And so we shouldn't be surprised that the end result of that is the still living statistic as of today that 9 in 10 businesses fail. Is a way out of that. And there is a way out of that that you can actually sustain and maintain. And that's what gets me up every morning to work with our clients. Just, we kicked off a brand new client yesterday. I'm in Southern California. They're a very large construction company doing about $50 million a year. And even in the wake of that kind of, we'll still call it a small business revenue, they are haunted by these problems. And it's causing mass exodus from their team, even while they maintain these revenues. And it's preventing them from getting to the 70, 80, $100 million milestone because they just can't break through. I'm going to ensure that, but there is a way forward, and it's just a matter of finding the right frameworks and systems and tools and implementing those in a fast way.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that you've touched on, and I'm curious to see what approach you would take in explaining this, but when you're dealing with an organization where maybe they are settling for status quo or not really pushing the envelope, whatever phrase you want to plug in there.
Sure.
If it comes to the setting where it's causing that high stress, low happiness outcome for the employees, what are some of the things that you generally see that are the causes of that? I know obviously workload, if you're giving people, 80 hours a week in work and that's just the standard every single time and expectation when that's not what they signed up for. Yeah. Obviously, there's going to be a level of that. But what other things beyond just workload do you see coming into play in that instance?
Yeah, so there are a few things, classic symptoms that cause these kind of emotions, or rather those emotions which are symptoms of these problems are things like lack of clarity. So, we in business, we talk about our supply chain, which often refers to third-party vendors, which supply us components or parts for our final product. But what we don't talk about, unfortunately, is the internal workings of a business are their own supply chain. So if you look at all the functions, sales, marketing, IT, HR, these are all moving parts that are interconnected. They're their own living supply chain. And what happens is because businesses don't focus on clear guidelines and instructions for what people will do and what is expected of them, which is a kind of a measuring stick for success, because they don't do these things, everybody operates according to their own rules. And so that's one often very large component, is there's just missing instructions for how to get from A to Z. And so everybody feels their way around frantically and violently. This is also fascinating to me, by the way. They often generate a fair amount of revenue in doing it, right? But at the cost of the people. So that's one area. Another big area is this term called decisions rights, meaning in the middle of not having instructions and guidelines that give the business, the people rails and the process rails, there is really mixed up and mixed signals about who is responsible to make what decisions, who's responsible to own which decisions. And so because even at the C-suite level, you have confusion there. You have C-suite people going to other C-suite people and expecting that it was their job to make the decision. You have people in the middle management going all these different directions to get approvals or sign-offs or answers. And everybody's running around with their head cut off and nobody knows. And then somebody steps up to make a decision and the CEO is upset or the VP is upset because they don't like the decision they made when somebody was just trying to get it done. So I'd say those are two very big areas where you see these symptoms of and very real frustrations and complaining, which produces the the unhappiness. Maybe one other area I'll add to is the topic of career path planning. Another area where you see people very unhappy is they were promised on the way in that working for this company was going to give them a great opportunity. But what most businesses don't do is follow through on that commitment to that promise and give them a roadmap that will allow them to keep leveling up in pay and title. We've heard on LinkedIn, Nick, people
Yeah.
don't leave a company, they leave a bad manager and all that stuff. And I think part of that is true. But I think at the end of the day, it's the company's responsibility to chart a great path so that when they hire great people, those great people will stay. Great people will stay if you take care of them. They will.
It's true.
Like they really will if you take good care of them. But most businesses don't focus on care. They focus on revenue at all costs. Yeah.
Yeah. And even for me, I come from an HR background. So what you're sharing as far as that career path planning, or in some instances, it's replacing somebody who's retired. So it's succession planning.
Succession
If this
planning.
person retires, this you are in this position, you can move up.
Yeah.
But giving people that trajectory, especially, I don't know if you've seen the statistics on this, but it is a significant percentage of millennials and Gen Z. If they do not see that career path, then they are more unhappy and more ready to leave. That they
Right.
want to see skill development, talent development, and a career path. And if
Yeah.
they are seeing some gap there, they want to move on. So even in what we're talking about, looking at the happiness of the employee at that point, especially with millennials and Gen Z soon to become the majority of the workforce here in the United States. I believe within the next 2 years, they're going to be the significant portion of the workforce.
That's right.
And they're wanting to see this career planning. I think that's an excellent point to kind of throw in there and
Yeah.
tag in as well. Like I said, that's one for me, coming from an HR background. That's what I'm
Sure.
passionate about in the training and development space. But I
Yes.
think that's really important. So, from your perspective, please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you. I was just going to add another comment on the comment. So I'm so with you. Gen Z is the new frontier. They are the future of success. They're the ones that are going to pave the new path for the way businesses operate. And to your point about they're not going to tolerate businesses that aren't going to give them a plan for opportunity in the future. But I think the big, added to that, which is why I think the future potentially could be so bright, is they're also not going to tolerate this. We talked about earlier, the absence of work-life balance. They have already declared publicly, I'm not going to work myself to death. I would rather go work somewhere else where I get paid less and I'm happy and my mental health is at bay and I don't take all the stress you pay me to create home with me. I'd rather go work somewhere else than have all of
Yeah.
that, you know? But you take a company in the future who gives them a strong career path, who commit to it on their behalf, and give them a healthy operating culture and healthy operating HR division. You got, I think you got something really powerful as a business.
Absolutely. And I know even for me, one thing that I'm focusing on is how can I teach and train managers and leaders to lead and be more effective with Gen Z specifically, because that is going to be, like you said, the new frontier and going to determine the success of many businesses in the future. So
Yeah.
spot on with that. With kind of where we're at, you referenced the culture, of your mental health being taken care of. You've got the career path, all of these things in culture.
Yeah.
What are some things that you would see or recommend improving to help with this stress that employees are facing? What are some things that maybe a manager, leader, a VP could start to focus in on and say, these are some things we need to start implementing and focusing on to make this culture better for our employees?
My gosh, we may have to do a few podcasts just on that single question, Nick. But it's
Bullet
such a
points
good
now,
one.
second podcast later.
It's such a good one. And it really, there are, I have a saying, which is, it's either, success by 1,000 optimizations or death by 1,000 cuts. So the answer to that really is a collective of unified parts that work together. But I'll try to hit maybe on 2 or 3 that I think would really help them move the needle and begin to establish a culture of health and wellness. I think the first is, you called it, it has to start at the top. So you have to have whoever the head of the organization is must value health as it relates to the operations and the people. And then you have to define what that health is. They have to define those values and then make sure they permeate into the leadership that are hands-on with the people. So Jeff Weiner, he's the ex-CEO of LinkedIn. He said this really great thing that I love. He said, my job really is to be the chief culture officer, but he said, I hate that term. What I really like is my job is to be the chief reminder officer. And his job is to constantly remind his leaders about their job as leaders, And
That's
so
good.
at Clarity Ops, we use a little acronym called It's As Easy as Pie. You need to be professional. So meaning, you need to, as a leader, you need to be an excellent planner. You need to be an excellent executor. You need to be an excellent documenter. Whatever your job as a leader is, do it professionally and with excellence. You have to have integrity, right? And so don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat, don't gossip about people, don't let other people gossip. That's cancerous. Do what you say, do what you said you will do, like honor your promises. Be faithful, be dependable, be trustworthy. So that's the integrity part. And then the E in PI stands for empathy. So, have a high EQ, have grace for people, care about people like authentically, and demonstrate that in your behavior and in your management efforts. So, right. So start at the top, make sure the head values these things that make a culture healthy and well, then remind them of these tenets of what are required. And then I'd say lastly, so then there's pie. And then maybe a third one, and there really are 20 of these, Nick, but I think a third one would be to load balance freedom with accountability. So, people are hired to do a job, and that job is to go work, produce value for the company so the company wins.
Right.
Somehow, some way, that has become a lost narrative. And so I think a great company with great leaders, to establish health, they'll give rails to people, kind of set them free and let those rails govern the execution of the people. And people really like that. And that, when you don't have managers frantically coming down on people and whipping them, but instead they let the rails govern the people, people really excel and do great things.
Absolutely.
And when that's governed by professionalism and integrity and empathy, and then that is always the standard, along with the other 17 things, great things happen.
Absolutely. And I know even for me in my professional career, when I was in a corporate setting,
Yeah.
when I had more of the guardrails from a leadership perspective, I was able to do a whole lot more because I felt like I had the freedom to decide to choose on certain aspects, but I knew what was acceptable within the parameters or the rails that was
That's
given
great.
to me.
I love it.
But I had one supervisor who, you talked about a supervisor who maybe, or a leader that kind of comes on very strong, beats you down, is constantly on you for different things.
Yeah.
And I've seen where that becomes so frustrating because in my instance, having a leader like that, I joke about the story where it was this individual would send an email, stand up, walk to your cubicle, which was only a couple spots away, and say, "Have you read my email?" And the notification had not even popped up on the computer yet. And in my mind, I'm wanting to look and go, dude, sit down. Like, give me 5 minutes. But that's hard when you're an employee. This is your supervisor. You can't do that kind of thing. But that kind of setting, it's tough.
Yeah.
And so in that instance, I know that's kind of a funny, extreme example. This individual wasn't like that all the time. That was just one instance that I remember that there was characteristics like that. And
Yeah.
he would be what you would call kind of a micromanager in
Yeah.
that sense. That would kind of be the term. And so hearing kind of your conversation and what you're sharing so far, there's very much the idea that I'm getting of you give people a level of freedom versus micromanaging or following. You set the rails and then you
Yeah.
lead and define things within those rails or those parameters. Do you, from your perspective, do you feel like the micromanaging or not giving employees permission to kind of work with a level of freedom or work within rails or however you may define it, do you see that as still an ongoing issue in our corporate culture?
I do. I rarely see. You know what I usually see is extremes of both. See either extreme micromanaging, which I have a hypothesis about why that happens, and then I see the other side, which is a total freedom, like willy nilly, which creates total chaos.
Right.
So that so I see them both. But micromanagement, is still alive and well, unfortunately. I mean, heck, all you got to do is jump on LinkedIn for 10 minutes and
Sure.
we'll see a post about it. So it's happening. But,
Absolutely.
the one thing that is changing about the micromanagement thing, I think, is at least now it's being talked about quite a bit, you know? Uh,
Yes. That's what I was
it,
thinking as well.
were you? Yeah,
Yeah, it seems like people are just talking about it. There's more awareness around it of
there you go.
people don't like working for a leader who does this.
No.
That kind
Yeah,
of mindset.
that's right. So that's positive. What is still missing, however, when it comes to the narrative and the awareness of micromanagement, is it's still in the complain phase. So, what we will see on LinkedIn and all the posts is, here's how you can identify a bad manager who's a micromanager, or they'll say things like, here's how you can stop micromanagement, and they're typically very strategic what's, like, high level, um, give your people freedom, like don't hover over your people, and that's not helpful,
Right.
because there's no plan there. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
there's no action you can take off that, really.
no, there's not. And I would contend the reason I think managers micromanage is not because, this is in general, they're people that are just control freaks. And they are out there, we know that. But I think it's an 80-20. I think, probably 80% of them are not control freaks. But here's their challenge, that, they're the people that are, by nature, they're not control freaks. They're just trying to do a great job. They have a conundrum. The business set up these leaders, these management leaders, to fail, because the business at the head is not responsible enough to say to the leaders, here is infrastructure and a plan of process and systems that you can deploy to your people so they can operate orderly, so that you can measure outcome and determine if we're winning or losing. Most businesses don't give their leaders that. And so leaders are frantically clawing at and trying to herd the cats, because the cats are running wild. Why? Because they don't have rails. And so that ends up being micromanagement. Managers trying to frantically herd the cats and get them all into, into the opening fence. And people hate that. And I get it. And I think the managers hate that too. But going back to the status quo thing, that's how most businesses operate.
Yeah. And I think even kind of the perspective we were talking about is that being the status quo, and what your organization does with Clarity Ops is challenging that status quo, because until we challenge it and break out of it or call attention to it, like you talked about, yes, it's in the complaining phase as far as micromanaging, but there's attention being drawn to it. There's the complaining about it. Okay, great. Now how can we solve it?
There you
What
go.
what can we do to improve this setting? So
That's
just
good.
from your perspective, give a couple ideas. What are some things that if Garrett would tell all these people dealing with micromanaging, here's ways that you could improve this in your organization or improve the management in your organization. What's just a couple quick things that you would kind of focus in on?
Well, they do tie into some of the things we talked about earlier. Change, I've only seen change be able to be built and maintained if it comes from the top. So if you're a manager and you see all this chaos and you want change, go to the top and see if they would partner with you, or if you guys can partner up and come up with a how to change these things.
Yeah.
That's number one, because without it, I really think it'll be futile, because you won't have support, right?
Right.
But let's say the leader at the top raises their hand and they say, we want change. Number one, I recommend defining values. Define values. Include in there that you believe in accountability. Include in there that you believe in measuring your outcomes and holding those outcomes accountable. Next, I would recommend a load balancing of management leadership. What I continue to see and have, I think, my whole career, and chief sinner on this one, is businesses find great leaders who demonstrate that they can tow a ton of weight and embrace a bunch of pressure. And then leaders go, that woman, that dude, they're amazing, and they dump on them. And that's the worst thing you can do to a great person. And so I've developed a framework called a quad core management framework. And what it does, just like a very well-built computer, is it distributes the load to bespoke positions so that they can stay focused and be strong and have sturdy output and be really great at a bespoke function and not have to do the job of 3 or 4 people. So that's just organizational architecture. And so I think that, like, at a high level, those 3 things will move mountains in a business.
I think that's some great advice, some great observations. And I think that's a good way to kind of wrap up the bulk of our conversation, because we've tied in a lot of things that really apply to a lot of leaders in a lot of areas. Whether it's status quo, you want to see things improved one way or another, whether it's micromanaging, whether it's the happiness and success of your employees. There is a lot of information that we've talked about these last 20, 25 minutes that can really challenge an organization to evaluate where are we at, or a leader to evaluate where are we at as a company, as an organization. Are we doing these things well, and can we do them better? Do we need help to do them better? Do we need to bring people in, consultants in? What do we need to do to challenge the status quo and break out of it and move forward? So, Garrett, from that perspective, I just want to say thank you for all the information, the conversation. This has been amazing. And I do want to get to a couple wrap up questions. I gave you heads up ahead of time so you could think about it. But for my podcast audience, do you have a book recommendation, something that's maybe been very impactful for you, something that's really been a meaningful book in your career that you would be willing to recommend out?
100%. Yeah, 100%. I have many, but I'll recommend one, which is, it's called The $1 Trillion Coach. And it is the biography of Bill Campbell, who was the executive coach to Steve Jobs, to Bill Gates, to Eric Schmidt, and a whole host of other really great entrepreneurs and business leaders. And the reason I'd recommend it is he says so many profound things, but The one thing that sticks out to me is he says, in order to be a great leader, you must have first been a great manager. And he goes on to talk about that, but he basically says management is all about professional, well-organized, well-planned execution, right? And that in order to be that sort of person, you have to have pie. And so he says, when you establish a reputation as a manager, that you're faithful, dependable, timely, trustworthy, that you get your job done, you've demonstrated your professional capabilities in management, people automatically follow you, which makes you a leader.
Yes.
And that was so profound to me. And so I highly recommend the book for that reason.
Yeah, I think that's a great recommendation. So the other wrap-up question that I want to throw out there and ask you is, for somebody that's maybe just getting started on that leadership journey, or they're a young professional wanting to go into leadership,
Yeah.
from your experience, your career, and especially from working with all these organizations, what's one bit of advice that you would offer up to them to help them along their journey?
Yeah. I would say, don't buy the lie, whether self-imposed or heard it otherwise, that you have to do it alone. You don't, and you shouldn't. Get help. Get advice. Find smart, seasoned people that can save you a decade's worth of mistakes and pain, and get under their wing and learn.
I think that's great advice. And I've heard that myself. I've told that to people, and I've had other podcast guests that, not those exact words, but very similar things. And I think that's something truly needs reminding and reiterating over and over, that doing it alone is not the way to do it. Get help,
No.
advice, a coach, a mentor, get somebody alongside you to help as you grow. So, Garrett, before we wrap up and completely finish, how can people connect with you? How can they find out about Clarity Ops, contact Clarity Ops, to just plug a little bit of your business and how to connect and find you?
Oh, thanks so much, Nick. I sure appreciate that. So I'm on LinkedIn. Garrett Delph is my handle. The website for the business is clarityops.co. And lots of content there, lots about what we do. They can contact me through the site or through LinkedIn. And yeah, any business that has come to that point where they have that epiphany, where they go, okay, we don't want to do business this way anymore. We want a bright future into the new. That's what I'm here for.
Absolutely. So, podcast audience, I will link Garrett's LinkedIn, their company website, and I will also link the book recommendation that he had, all in the description of the podcast. So find the description wherever you are watching or listening to this podcast, and you will find those links in that. I want to thank you again, Garrett, for jumping on. I'm really glad I got a chance to meet with you, connect with you, and us to have this chat today. So thank you for being on the podcast.
It's been a real treat, Nick. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, podcast audience, hope you enjoyed. Definitely go connect with Garrett. Check out his organization, that book recommendation down below, and be sure to like, rate, subscribe, whatever you can to help grow and spread the podcast. Really appreciate it. Help us grow and reach more people. Be on the lookout. New episodes every single week.